I call the Planning Commission meeting for October 4th, 2022 to order. Our first item of business is public comments. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's meeting. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our virtual guests. If you are online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the chair and the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Screen sharing is not allowed. You can submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the commission for the next meeting. Please do not comment about pending development projects on which the Planning Commission or the City Council will make future decisions, as those are quasi-judicial matters, and planning commissioners and council members must limit their communication about such matters. This meeting is being recorded. We appreciate you for taking the time to express your comments. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone virtually?
We're going to start with our on-site guest first, Elizabeth Mooney.
Oh, we do. She did sign it.
Hi, Planning Commission. So nice to see you. And my name's Elizabeth Mooney. I live in Kenmore. First, I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work that I watched via Zoom rectangles and the staff. And, you know, that was not easy. I hope that now that we're here and can meet here, that it'll feel better, and it feels better to me. So thank you. I see some of my new friends from Kenmore, so this is great. I appreciate all the hard work. I did not keep up on all of it, but I have talked to a couple of you about comparing Kenmore's plans, salmon restoration in our streams, and Lake Forest Park's tree retention, or Kenmore's lack thereof, or Kenmore codes. I don't know everything, but I do think that it is really important, and a cautionary tale is happening here in our North Lake Washington area. I think we have a lot of assessments that we need to do before we make major zoning or comp plan or any other changes, until we get the community back in here to hear you and work with you and the city council. However, I do want to say thank you, because what I'm learning, since the single family housing was going to be eliminated, hopefully it won't be in one fell swoop of 70%. And I've been attending those meetings. You, I understand, made a recommendation that the council did not just take. And so thank you very much for all that hard work with staff, or whoever all you worked with, because my understanding is that that is a lot better than what the council is proposing now and what came out on that giant postcard that not even everybody has received. And that is a different issue. Okay, so that being said, I hope you take that as a thank you. I would like to start inviting some of my new friends, not new friends, they're old friends that just haven't been a part of our city's building planning commission council. And so there are a couple people that I want to bring in for coffee with you. So I want to invite you to coffee at some time. And then just in our vision, could you please start emphasizing salmon restoration? We need to do an assessment of where we are before we make any more density decisions. transit-oriented district. I will try to learn more about it, but put our density right down where the buses are until we get biological assessment of each of our various wonderful streams that need to have salmon restoration, tree retention, etc.
Thank you, Ms. Mooney. Okay, who's next?
We have no more commenters.
Last chance, those on video. So we're going to go to our next item on business, which is the approval of minutes.
Those will be available for the next meeting.
Thank you. That's what I thought. They're not there. And if I read through the fine print, I would have realized that. Okay, the next item is transit-oriented development regulations based upon what we worked on last meeting. And the staff has taken some of the concerns that we have had at that time, limited concerns, as I would say, compared to the massive size of work that you folks have done. So Lori, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to you or whoever's going to speak to first.
Well, good evening, planning commissioners. It's very nice to see many of you in person. So tonight we are continuing our work on the transit-oriented development regulations. At the end of your last meeting, you had approved most of the amendments in preparation for the public hearing, which is happening on October 18th. And we have already begun advertising that. This week, we'll be sending out a postcard to all of the property owners in the TOD area and the downtown, since some of the downtown standards would be changing, so that they'll be informed of the change. We have a web page set up, and then we'll be advertising it through the city's regular channels. I also sent the draft amendments as far as they were ready to those who participated on the developers panel in February, reminding them and thanking them again for their participation and giving them an opportunity to comment. I said, contact me if you want to talk about it. Otherwise, they're welcome to come to the public hearing or submit materials anytime before the public hearing. So that's where we are. And I'm thinking that tonight's meeting might be fairly short, depending on how much you want to talk about the 4 outstanding items that were in the memo, the staff memo. So with your permission, I'll just run through those 4 items and we can talk about it. So the first item, this was brought up by Commissioner Lutzis, thank you, is to make sure that the regulations that we're looking at are coordinated with the missing middle housing regulations. It's an awkward situation when you have 2 sets of regulations moving forward. So actually, the TOD amendments are probably not going to be adopted by the City Council until January. Just given the timing and the joint meeting will probably happen in November. So by then, presumably, the decision on what's happening with missing middle housing will have been made, and then we'll adjust as a need be. So I have a placekeeper in my mind about duplexes and triplexes. There are a number of other changes that have to do with naming of zones and that kind of thing. So, but I can't move forward until I know what the City Council is doing with the amendments. So just so you know, I'm ready.
Question on that.
Sure.
So if you said adjustments, if we
Right.
have to make, are those adjustments major enough that we have to rehear?
No.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, it would just be there. It's like technical corrections to the way certain code sections read. So for example, if the R6 zone were to become the RM zone, I'm going to have to acknowledge that those changes have already been made and put them in the rules that would be in your ordinance.
I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet. So any more questions about that?
Commissioners, seeing none, go ahead, please.
Okay. So the second item had to do with impervious surface maximums, and you had asked whether there were concepts in the climate action plan, the CAP, that would address this topic. And then also you asked me to look at those standards and talk with the environmental services manager about those. So we did both of those things, and you can see in the memo, I put the information from the CAP, which emphasizes both higher density, which is what we're aiming for downtown, and low impact development, which is in the CAP, but as a longer term project needing more review and effort. So I contacted Richard Sawyer, sent him an email and asked your questions. And he sent me back actually a couple of emails. So I am going to read through those, and then I'm going to show you some slides, which is what Brian was helping me with. So his comments, lower impervious area and higher density are both LID principles. LID can be applied in dense urban areas, and I'm going to show you some photos of that. He says the goal is to have higher density closer in so that you have more people using a given area and you're not spreading the impacts of cars and all those impervious surfaces all the way out. So that's why there is support for higher density development. And then if you all could switch to the screen, I'm going to show you some images that he sent me. So what he was telling me is that in landscaped areas, in higher density development, you can use low impact development techniques. And so this, for example, is a surface water control feature in a higher density urban environment. You can see the impervious surface. Here's another one. Again, you can see we're right in the middle of an urban area, but there's this surface water feature here to help with cleaning the runoff. Here's another one, this one actually in use, where the amenity strip is being used as a rain garden, basically. And then this is a residential project. Again, you can see that portions of it are being used for surface water control. One of these pictures, and I think it was the very first one, was actually from the city of Kirkland, so a neighboring jurisdiction. So with that information, he also reminded me that in 2016, as part of the work we did with surface water, the city looked at, his group looked at impervious surfaces and actually reduced the percentages in some zones. They did not do that in downtown, but he said that as part of this next review of surface water, which the surface water element is scheduled for 2023, that would be something that they would be reconsidering. So based on that, staff is recommending now that we not tackle this topic, which is bigger than the TOD, and that we move forward with the higher density and the current maximum impervious surface.
Members, any questions? Speaking. Spend it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lori, for all of that digging about impervious surfaces. The pictures of the green stormwater infrastructure that you showed are most of them exactly what I would love to see more of in Kenmore. but there's no way to really accelerate that. We have to wait until we do the surface water element.
Well, the acceleration could happen at a policy level in conjunction. And I would assume, I don't know this, but Richard may be also bringing forward the surface water regulations. Do you remember where that was on the work program? There were some amendments that were, I think, targeted either this year or next. I can't remember.
I think it's next year, but there are already provisions in the code for low impact development. So there are provisions in the code, in the regulations. And like I said, the comp plan stuff will provide additional policy direction. And then if there's any need to tweak or amend the regulations, they'll either come forward at the same time or as a next phase.
Yeah, the other thing, and this just comes to mind, is that next year is also the downtown sub-element. And there could be a crossover policy direction there. One thing Richard did say in his email was that it might be appropriate to have some policy direction that said any required landscape areas, whether in the right-of-way or on the private property in the downtown area, should be allowed to use those landscaped areas for green stormwater treatment. So that would be a policy direction that could be added. And then when the regulations are amended the next time, then that could be incorporated.
You have a follow-on? You're done? You have a, I can't.
This is my first time being in person, so I'm trying to figure it out here with Dwight. Thank you so much. Bothell too is using their right of ways as rain gardens, so I think that's another really good example. They look a little bit like that picture you showed us where it looks like a waterfall, not quite exactly any nice waterfall features, but again, I would just love to see more things like that in Kenmore, and any opportunity we have to accelerate that, I would love to have. Coho right now are dying because of our tire dust, and so anything we can do to make it happen faster, let me know, and I will support that.
Yeah, I am happy to send an email back to Richard with that. I also could bring back information about when he anticipates redoing the surface water regulations. I think he's going to do them at the same time next year, but I can confirm that.
Thank you, Lori, and now I'm done, Dwight.
Commissioner Vanderleen? Yeah, you're muted.
There we go. First of all, sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight. Question, who maintains or who has the responsibility for maintaining the rain gardens, particularly those that are in the city's right of way?
I assume that the city is responsible for those in the right of way or on public property. And I think probably private property owners are responsible if it's on their development. Although I will say the city has quite an active sort of stormwater inspection program. And so I assume that they're inspecting those green facilities as well, but that's another piece of information I could confirm.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. Recently, I had the opportunity to observe really good rain garden use in the right-of-ways along the streets in a development that was maintained by the owners. And it worked really well and it looked very nice. But I noticed as I was there, it took a lot of maintenance. They were out there probably, I would say, every other week. And so I'd be curious to know if we're prepared, either the city to be able to maintain those and how that would be funded, or if that becomes a responsibility of the development or the homeowner.
Yeah, I don't think the city maintains it. I hope I didn't say that. On private property, the city wouldn't maintain it. They have an inspection program.
Right.
And then I think maybe some of the private catch basins, not the green stormwater, but the catch basins, they may actually use the city's Vector truck to clean those out. But
Sure.
I'll get the information. How about that?
That'd be great. I'm just interested in what the maintenance is and who the responsibility is, because I think they're a great idea and absolutely am for them. I want to make sure that we've accounted for the cost of ongoing maintenance so that they do perform their function in the future.
Commissioner Lutzes.
I can actually answer all of these questions.
Oh, good.
Um,
That's right.
For the last 2 summers, I have maintained all of the city's surface water facilities from retention ponds to bioswales. So
Okay.
actually, that's been me that's been out there maintaining these sorts of facilities. Yes, the city does maintain them. Typically, it's required for new developments to put in these sorts of facilities. So with a new construction plat or something like that, they typically put in whether it's a vault or an underground facility. And then after they complete it, it's turned over to the city. Now, I think there's a mix. There are some that are public and some that are private. Most of them are turned over there. But for these sorts of things, these impervious surface ones, these bioswales, retention ponds and whatever else it might be, yes, the city would maintain them. I'm trying to think, what else did we discuss here? Were there other questions that you had, Mike?
Well, I think you answered my main one, which is we just need to keep Nathan on the payroll here and solve all these problems. We could walk away from it. If that's not practical, as we're thinking about things like in lieu of fees, development fees, I just want to make sure that we're incorporating into them the ongoing maintenance of these, I think, very valuable facilities.
Yes, so the city does both inspect them and maintain them. I was part of the inspection process. There was another person, I'm sorry, I was part of the maintenance process. There was another individual who would inspect these facilities, and they go through routinely. I'm not sure how often it is to inspect these facilities, to clear them if needed, and to make improvements. Sometimes that involves, putting in new underground pipes or whatever else it might be. At least from my talking with Richard, it sounds like these new facilities are added when there's new development. And then with these new development, there's typically additional revenue, whether that's tax-based or whatever it might be, that helps to cover the cost of maintenance of these sorts of facilities. So I believe that answered your question. I hope that
yes,
answered
it
your
did.
question.
And actually anticipated one of the answers I was looking for.
Mhm.
Or remedies, which is, I know in Kirkland, they actually, I think, as I understand it, they incorporated the maintenance of this into a utility fee that is the responsibility of the homeowner to pay, and that covers but not only the maintenance and ongoing support of the surface water, but also other street facilities. So something I think we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of these facilities which are located on private property that the city has easements to be able to go in and maintain these and inspect them and do whatever else they need to. But yes, you're right about all that.
Any further comments? Okay, so hearing none, I have a question of what was actually said, and it was your suggestion to put a sentence in this document?
No, my suggestion was to retain at this time the 90% impervious surface limit for downtown, knowing that the commission is concerned about whether that should be revisited, and then taking that up again at the time that the downtown chapter of the comprehensive plan and the surface water chapter of the comprehensive plan, both of which are coming to you next year, are reviewed, to add policy direction there. And then I'm going to come back and tell you when Richard has scheduled the regulations that go along with that, whether he's doing it at the same time.
Okay, so there's nothing to be added here.
Correct.
So if there's no further comment, we'll go to item number 3 on your memo.
Okay, so this had to do with the fee in lieu for affordable housing. And I'm sorry that Commissioner Torres Metapor isn't here tonight, because she was the one who had that great article on pros and cons of fees in lieu. Mike Stanger with Arch took that and said he was going to use it in other contexts. It was very helpful, and she forwarded it to me right after the message. There's Mike. Anyway, so that paper talked about the pros and cons. The pros certainly were a more streamlined, flexible development process, but a con would be that allowing in lieu fees may limit opportunities in opportunity-rich areas. If someone is building a project in an opportunity-rich area and then they're doing a fee, perhaps it doesn't end up being in the desired area. So Mike reviewed the current in lieu fee standard in the code and had some suggestions, and those are in attachment 3 to your packet. And there are a number of things. So I guess what we can do is just ask if you had any questions about that. Mike, did you want to say anything? We also included Bothell and Redmond's examples.
Okay, Mike shook his head. No, I think I saw that.
Okay. Basically, it formalizes, the amendments formalize the process. So that prior to the issuance of the building permit, we want to know that we have a written agreement executed by the applicant that's going to ensure that the city is going to get its payment. And they may need to secure that if they aren't providing the cash up front. Then we collect the money in an affordable housing fund. Then before we execute the agreement to accept payment, we need to have a plan for investing the money. And then it adds some additional language about where that money should be invested. So it should be hopefully in the same sub area of the project that generated the fee. If that's not possible, then it could be in other sub areas of the city as a second priority, or even within another jurisdiction as a third priority if the location is appropriate. And that third location is referenced because this money could go to the Arch Housing Trust Fund, which, as you know, funds affordable units throughout the east side. We contribute to that. When Mike was doing his research, we discovered that we did have one project that took in an in lieu fee last year, and that generated, I think it was about $380,000 that the city will now use for affordable housing. So.
To be clear, there is blue items on that.
In this one, in attachment, well, it's
Four,
in two
attachment,
places. In
okay.
attachment 4, right, it's the blue language about in lieu fee in section 1877.045. If you want to see it with the yellow language, standalone, that's
Yeah.
attachment 3.
And attachment 4 is on page 25 and 26. 27. Which is pretty much duplicated from the other.
Yeah, it is duplicate. Mhm.
Just want to make sure I read it right.
Yeah, you did.
Is there any comments on that? Okay, Commissioner Vanderleen.
Thank you. Question on attachment 3, item number 4. I want to make sure I understand or what our intent of this language is. Are we intending here that the city manager has to approve or execute an agreement to accept payment in lieu of, they must have a plan for investing the funds, or that they must actually have identified a project before they approve the agreement?
Yeah, I think the intent is to have a plan. For example, if the money were to be given to the Arch Housing Trust Fund, if that were an approach, that is a plan. And then the Housing Trust Fund takes applications from projects all over the east side, which are then chosen by the Arch, I guess, approved by the Arch Executive Board. And Mike's going to jump in here if I'm saying something that's not quite accurate. So that's a plan, not a project. If there's a project, then that's another alternative.
Sure. So I don't want to wordsmith this for you, Lori, but I think maybe the wording could be changed a little bit here so that it's very clear that we're talking about the requirement is for a plan and not necessarily you'd identified at that time what the actual project would be.
Okay, so the current language is before the city manager approves or executes an agreement to accept payment in lieu of affordable housing, the city must have a plan for investing funds. Oh, I see, in an affordable housing project. That's the part.
Yes, yes. You
Okay.
could probably just stop it with funds in an investing funds in an affordable housing.
In affordable housing
affordable
that
housing, yeah.
supports city objectives,
Yeah,
something like
that's right.
that.
Right. Yeah. Just take out the word project.
Right, correct.
there-
Is the rest of the commission?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Okay.
Is there any objection to that change? Hearing-
Commissioner Wykoff
Oh,
has
Derek,
his hand up.
Commissioner Wykoff? Did you want to speak to your objection?
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually an objection to this particular point, but the way I was trying to clarify on the last meeting when we talked about this topic was if someone's building a project that requires affordable housing, that affordable housing was required to be available at the same time as the non-affordable housing in that project. So in other words, in the building, they had to finish and make available affordable housing at the same time frame that the rest of the building would be available. It couldn't be a time period down the road.
Like
And
5
so my
years?
concern with this fee in lieu proposal, the way it's kind of coming out here, is that someone could put money in Kenmore's pockets for a project at a later time, but it doesn't equal or solve the problem at the same time that this project would be completed. So I think not only are we opening up the book for fee in lieu, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, as long as we meet the objective overall of affordable housing, I still think the overall object of that in the first place was to achieve the affordable housing at the same time as this project. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't have the wording in there that says there must be a plan identified and a project that's going to in some way so that we get that housing at the same time as this other project. I don't know that the object for a fee in lieu was to put it in a bank for someday, but to actually equal affordable housing.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts about that, and then I know Mike will want to speak. I appreciate the concept. The problem is if we take in the money, then there are already, at least for the Housing Trust Fund, there are standardized cycles. So we could take in the money and then not have a project even selected until maybe even a year down the road, and then that project has to be built. So I think trying to tie it to when the project that's using the fee in lieu is completed, I think that would be very difficult. However, perhaps we could put some sort of a time limit on it that's a little more flexible, but doesn't tie it directly to that project. So now Mike is perhaps wanting to say something.
Right, thank you. I also appreciate the concern and the question. And in an ideal world, I'd be happy to agree with, language exactly like that. What happens sometimes, though, is even if we have a project proposal that that is ready to take the money, the life cycle to get an affordable housing project, especially if it's a bigger one, can take longer than the one that is giving the money. So, for example, in Redmond, there's a apartment building being built. It may even have opened across the street from Redmond City Hall that paid a fee in lieu that went directly into development of the Together Center project just around the corner from there at across from Bella Bottega. We knew which project and the city knew which project they wanted the money to go to, and followed through on it. But the timing, because we're just one funder and we're not the developer, we don't always have control over the timing of those projects. Fortunately, this one is the Together Center is coming along well and will open in the spring. But had any hiccup occurred, then that timing could have been thrown off, or if something happened to fall through, what would we do with them? With the funds? Would we have to return it to the payer, or I didn't want to try and account for every possibility. So I thought it would be best if we understand that the intent is that we have a place in mind for the money, and we're going to do the best we can to make those coincide.
Commissioner Lutzis.
I see what you're saying, Derek, but another thought that came up when Mr. Stanger was talking is, what if there's circumstances sort of outside of the city's control? Say we have a project, lined up to go, but there's, the housing crash of 2008 put a lot of developers out of business and stalled a lot of projects for a couple of years, and that's not something that the city can really control. If we put constraints on it to a specific year, it might be difficult to follow due to unforeseen circumstances in the future. And I don't know what that could mean for the city if we put this into policy. So, I mean, I guess I'd be more comfortable to address your need, but also maybe accommodate for unforeseen circumstances. Say something along the lines of the city should make every effort to use these funds within a period of time. And that way it leaves it a little more open-ended just in case something happens, but it still emphasizes at least our desire to put these funds to use within a certain amount of time.
And I have a question since no one else. Oh, who? Commissioner Wyckoff, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with, and I see both sides of the issue here as far as the money's tied up or tagged or whatnot for this project, but I'm just hearing the rumblings in my head already. The people grow restless that you got the money, where's the project? Where's this housing at? And I can just hear it already. And so I think if there's just some way that we could get it in here that somebody's got to do something with this to move the ball forward with this money to step towards the project being done. I mean, obviously that's the whole point of the fee in lieu. And I just feel like just leaving it to say it needs to have identified a project or a plan actually is what we're saying. I just felt that was a little too loose. But again, you wouldn't want to have a deadline looming that you've got to spend the money on the wrong project if you've got something around the corner that makes a whole lot more sense, or just trying to line things up to make it happen. I get that. I'm just really fearful that the crowd will grow restless if things aren't done properly, and keep it transparent. I don't know how we do that, but that's my concern. This isn't meant to be an outright objection to what Mike was saying. I think we need to be very mindful of that and keep everybody in the loop and make it as transparent as possible, and maybe even say this is what this fee is intended for. This is dog-eared for something, and keep everybody abreast of that. That's my concern.
Mike, did you want to respond? You might need to unmute.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Be happy to reinstate the word project in there as shown in the draft. My thought when writing this was that it wouldn't be just, some vague intent to put it into affordable housing, but that we actually had a project in mind to invest it in, but still leave open the possibility that if something occurred, that we could redirect it to a different project as soon as possible.
So I was thinking about this, and one of the commissioners had started to say something like the city should make every effort to use these funds as quickly as possible. Would the commission feel comfortable with, and Mike, would you feel comfortable with language that just said that? Okay.
Go ahead. No, we're, Tracy's got a comment.
Yeah, I am okay with that, Lori, but my comment is that, and this is just a brainstorm, one way things are handled in my paying job is that when we get a grant to do a project, the funder requires that it be spent within, say, X number of years, but then you can request an extension. So something like that could maybe work. We would like this project to be built in. I'm going to make something up three years, but you could request an extension just so that there's accountability and then communication. I don't feel strongly about it. I like quickly as well.
I think I would ask Mike, since he's in the thick of funding affordable housing projects, his reaction: quickly as possible or within 3 years with the possibility of extension?
I don't think that would give us a lot of heartburn. We just have to remember that if it didn't go into the project that we originally intended, then we'd have to get back to the city to reallocate that funding. 3 years is not unreasonable. So, pleasure of the commission.
Okay, so I have one, before we get to that, I still have another question. So I'm a little confused. So if these funds, it sounds to me like they could go to a project outside the city. Is that, do I understand that?
So item number 5 sets out the priority for where the funding should go. So first priority is the sub-area location of the project that generated the in lieu fees. So
Yes,
the part of the city. And then the second choice is other sub-areas of the city, so other parts within the city of Kenmore. And then if there's not an opportunity there, then a third option would be a project outside of the city. As we do with our arch money, we fund projects in different part of the east side, assuming that people move around. But within close proximity to commercial uses, transit, or employment opportunities. So it's not out in the sticks somewhere where people
Okay,
might
so
not
my question
have their
is,
services.
if I understand correctly, there are standards as far as the percentage that we're supposed to meet of certain types of affordable housing within our city limit.
Though we don't have, no, at this point, we don't have housing needs identified. So all this would mean would be you're looking at zoning amendments that would require that 25% of the units in a new TOD development would be affordable to those making 50% area median income. Other standards in the code talk about other places where affordable housing is required. There aren't very many, but there are some. And so this fee in lieu applies to that and says, basically, if you had a requirement that you had to provide affordable housing, we would consider a fee in lieu, but there are standards for when you can do that. You can't just do it whenever you want.
Well, I'm concerned about state and county requirements that come down on us.
I think maybe.
Do
if
you
I can help
understand where
clarify-
I'm going
Well,
with that?
I'm going to try.
Okay.
I think you may be referring to the percentage of affordable housing in the housing element where we're supposed to meet, you know, a certain percentage of affordable housing. And then the concern would be if we allow that in another jurisdiction, we don't get credit for those units to meet those numbers. Is that?
That's right. And then when we were talking about that element, part of your concern was you had not seen the counties pass down rules or ordinances with regard to what we may be stuck with. And that's what's turning in my mind.
Yeah. So where we are with that. So the state just came out recently with their sort of basic guidance about housing needs. Currently, we have housing targets, and all that means is that we need to provide a certain number of housing units, which we're doing. But then this new state law says we need to have expectations for housing needs. And there are different ways that the county is thinking about allocating those needs between all the cities in the county. We won't have those numbers until probably the beginning of next year. So we're aware that that is an issue, but part of that conversation addresses this very question. How does the city get, how do these cities, arch cities, get credit for the fact that they're paying for affordable housing in other jurisdictions? So that's very much on the table.
At the county level.
Yeah, as part of this conversation. We don't have the numbers yet. We won't have them for months. But I suppose if the county took an approach that was very directive and said, no, you can't, even though you pay money to do, 30% of median or less housing in other jurisdictions, you can't count that, then we might have to revisit, I suppose, our fee in lieu. But at this point, I think, and Mike has his hand raised. He, I think, is on that county committee that's talking about this issue. So he may have some insights.
Well, I don't have any more information or insight on what the county might do with those local allocations. But I did want to mention that Arch has had for a number of years a way to do our own accounting of sorts or reporting of the to quantify and give credit, as it were, to cities, both for the units that that are funded within their community and the funds that they are providing for units outside the community. So we have a kind of a formula that prorates those credits to each community for both the location basis and the amount of funding that they're contributing. And that formula could change depending on what the county's guidance is, but we do have something in place that addresses that. And the second part is that, as Lori alluded to, over time, Arch members who are contributing to the trust fund have seen units come back and investment come back to the community and roughly the same amount that they've contributed. So so the 380,000 that you took in this year from the fee in lieu at the townhouse project may go, if this council approves it, may go to fund a project in, who knows, Issaquah or something. But then it's highly likely that, almost certain that other communities will be contributing at least $380,000 back to a project in Kenmore in the near future. So those things tend to even out.
I would assume that the city associations are all over this particular issue. Is that your understanding, Mike?
Yes, sir. If you're referring to the Suburban Cities Association or Sound Cities,
Yes.
whatever it's called
Mhm.
now, they
Whatever
are,
it's called now. That's true.
yeah, they're actively involved in the Affordable Housing Committee at the county level.
So, Mike, go ahead. Commissioner.
Yeah,
Vanderland.
just was going to point out under D, the heading of the in lieu of fee section, does the fact that the city manager has the approval right off the top of these provide an opportunity. I would assume that one of the things the city manager would be taking into account was whether or not they were meeting any to be determined county requirements going forward, and only would approve projects or disapprove a project based upon where they were with that goal. So I think we may have that. We may have a loose cover here that we can fall back on until or when if there's a gap between now and when the new information comes out.
All right. So back to the project word is, or we took it out. Do we need to put it back in or?
So the language that I have, that Commissioner Vanderland had suggested, is before the city manager approves or executes an agreement to accept payment in lieu of affordable housing, the city must have a plan for investing funds in affordable housing that supports city objectives. And then as a second sentence to that subsection, this was the language that we were just talking about. The city should make every effort to use these funds as quickly as possible, or an alternative, or within 3 years with the possibility of extension.
Commissioner Lutz's.
I have a question about that last part, the three years portion on. So my question would be, who would be applying for the extension? Who would be approving that extension? Who would be overseeing that extension and enforcing it if it's not approved? Is that just the city to the city to the city?
Yeah,
And I'm
it
a
would
little,
be.
yeah, okay. So I guess I'm a little confused by the need for that if the city is applying for an extension to the city, and then the city is the one who either approves, disapproves, and enforces that.
Yeah, all it does is it provides an end date.
Okay.
And that was the goal. We could change with the possibility of extension to say, or within 3 years. We can somehow qualify that within 3 years unless an appropriate project is, I like the quickly as possible language better, I think.
And
Just because we have to get into, well, who decides
Yeah.
the 3 years and what are the criteria?
And my question
And
about
what do
the
we do with it?
If we put the or 3 years, then it says, well, now we don't have to do it as quickly as possible because we can choose the 3-year option and wait until.
No, those were alternatives. I'm sorry. It was
Okay.
either use these funds as quickly as possible, or the second alternative
Oh,
that
we're not-
Commissioner
Yeah,
Banashinsky had mentioned was, or within 3 years with the possibility of
so
extension.
we're not putting both in.
No.
Okay, I that's my confusion. I thought
Yeah.
you were saying
No.
or as in putting
No.
both in. and we could
I'm
pick.
sorry.
Okay, thank you for that
I
clarification.
should have said option 1 or option 2.
Mike, did you have something more to say? Your hand's up.
Just wanted to request that if you wanted to go with the 3-year period, that it say something like commit the funding to a project rather than using it or anything that would imply that the money would have to actually there'd actually have to be invoices and payments and stuff, which could be harder to manage.
Is there a motion? We have 2 choices, so we have to figure out which we're going to do. Go ahead, Commissioner Lutz's.
I will make a motion that we adopt option 1, which I believe says, Lori, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the city should make every attempt to apply these funds to an affordable housing project as soon as possible? Or could you remind me of the wording?
Yeah.
That you would?
The city should make every effort to use these funds as quickly as possible.
And that's going to be inserted.
At the end, the last sentence in subsection 4.
4.
All right.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Commissioner Beneniski.
I would like to know if there's actually a problem that we're solving with this. Is this a current problem, money not being spent quickly enough?
Not that I'm aware of, especially with respect to affordable housing.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor either say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I believe that is a unanimous adoption of that amendment. And the project word is still out. Okay, just want to make sure. Is there any other discussion about this particular blue section? Okay, hearing none, let's move on.
Okay, so the last item that you had raised concerns about was language that has to do with the tenure of a project providing affordable housing under a code section called residential density incentives. This isn't in the main affordable housing section. This code section gives you the opportunity to provide certain things and you get certain things, more density, for example, in exchange. And so the question was, affordable housing units provided under this section shall remain affordable housing for a minimum of 50 years from the date of initial sale if owner occupied, or the life of the project if renter occupied. And the question was raised, what does that mean, life of the project? So the language inserted in number 4 after life of the project would say, i.e. the duration of the property's residential use. To clarify that that's what the life of the project is.
What happens if they change the use?
Then it's no longer, it's no longer a portion of that project. But that would,
Well, the 50 years, at 25 years, they changed the use to something else.
not
Okay.
for owner occupied. For that, it's 50 years. For renter occupied, it's saying if you change the use, so you tear down your building and now you're a commercial use or an office use, that's the life of the project.
Hmm. So if we invest, say, just using numbers, $500,000 into this residential project, and then in 25 years, they decide they need to tear it down because the land is more valuable to put up something else, we've lost that $500,000. I guess.
This is
my
only
concern.
if this particular code section is used. This is again, these residential density incentives, which are, it's something that a private developer would choose if they wanted to provide some low income housing, they could get more units, for example. This is not the 25% code requirement, for example, in the TOD. That is in a different section. And I'll
That's
try to-
okay, you don't have to. I trust you on that. I'm just, I've heard so many situations where the government money has been used for a affordable housing project of some sort, or any investment of government funds, and then 10, 20 years, the developer or owner just cut the land and sell it. That's just, people talk about that, and I would like to just address that so I can feel comfortable if someone asks me.
Okay, so I think this section would be for a private developer who has a residential project and could just for the sake of argument, could build 6 units. But if you built 9 units as a residential incentive, those units would have to be affordable. So that's the situation. We're not talking about public investment of money into those units. These units would be provided as part of a private residential project.
Okay.
That's the scenario we're talking about.
Not the other scenario that we've talked about
Correct.
previously. Okay. so
Exactly. Does that
thank
help?
you. That helps
Okay.
a lot. Commissioner Lutzis.
I have a quick question. What if the use of the unit changes? Does that reset the clock? If there are condos that are converted to apartments or apartments converted to condos, would that reset this clock? Because I know the time is a little bit different.
I don't think I can answer that, which is why Mike has his hand up.
Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Great question. In the covenant, let's say that it's a renter occupied apartment building. The covenant that the city would have on that property with the owner would have a provision that says if the owner wants to change the use to condominium, then they have to present the city with a proposal for maintaining the affordability of the units. And at that point, the city, they couldn't go forward with the condominiumization without the city's approval. And I have been through that once in a project in Kirkland, and we worked it out fine so that the units would be sold for private ownership, and then those buyers would have their resale covenants with the city. So I know it can be done. In that case, as it happened, then the owner couldn't sell enough of the units as condos, and they ended up taking it back as a rental property. So now the other experience, I guess I have been through the other direction as well, where the property owner acquired back the few market rate units that had been sold and had the rest of the property as rental units, but these 2 affordable units were held as by homeowners, and the multifamily owner has been anxious to buy them back so that they would have a whole property. And so we told them to be patient, and eventually one of the affordable homeowners was ready to sell, and we worked out a deal with them to make that affordable as an apartment unit. And then there's still one out there, and we'll go through that process sooner or later. So it can be worked out in a way that's that we assure the city that they will be affordable.
Okay, that was my question, was sort of what happens, and it sounds like a case-by-case basis. It wouldn't maybe exactly reset the clock for its change in use, but the affordability would be maintained.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Matthews.
Just out of curiosity, I know about the issue with a certain number of units in the past. People who were above the income level had purchased these units and rented them out against the rules. How is that going to be stopped in the future?
Well, we've stopped that by hiring staff who are dedicated to monitoring and enforcing the covenants better than we had been. We have, more dedicated. Up until that point, we had people who were kind of doing that part-time. And we've staffed up to better be able to handle it. We make periodic outreach to the homeowners, and also to check public records to make sure that there aren't any sales going on that we weren't alerted to, and so forth. So we've taken a number of measures to prevent that from happening again.
All right, is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Have we discussed all the blue items? Okay.
Yes.
Is there anything else that the staff would like to bring to the attention of the commission?
So the public hearing is, or will be scheduled for the 18th.
Correct. Okay, so okay, so hearing no further items to be discussed, if there's no objection, the Planning Commission approves the document as amended for public hearing. No objections. So ordered. Would. Okay. So is there any items for the good of the order? Commissioner Beneziski.
I have not known how to bring this back into the discussion. And since there's a draft zoning map in this packet, I thought I'd take that opportunity to do so. I am not requesting that any changes be made ahead of the public hearing, but I do want to advance the conversation about what to do about Swamp Creek coming through our downtown and TOD. I feel like Swamp Creek could use a bit more space than we're giving it through that area. We give it space upstream with the R1 zoning. And I guess this speaks to my continued desire to have some way, kind of a third way of zoning in Kenmore, a new way that is more ecologically sensitive, where we are really kind of not just using our critical areas regulations to protect our environmentally sensitive areas, but thinking about what the land is really suitable for instead of simply zoning by precedent or what's already built. I don't know how to have that conversation, so I guess I'm looking for help.
Staff, would you?
Well,
like to
I think
comment
what
on that?
the commissioner is suggesting is that rather than do transit-oriented development on the parcels along Swamp Creek, which basically are the commercial parcels sort of are in the area of Kenmore Lanes and some of the development, the grocery outlet, et cetera, as Swamp Creek comes down around that. I think what she is suggesting is, should transit-oriented development be allowed in that corridor, using the critical area rules to protect it and the shoreline rules to protect it, or should a different approach be taken, which would not allow that higher density in that area?
Lori, you heard me very well. Thank you. That's a gift.
Staff does not recommend that change.
Well,
and-
no, I wasn't asking for, the
Yeah.
interpretation so that
Yes,
we were
gotcha.
clear and on the record. There further discussion on that concern? I think it's the Planning Commission has been on record as being concerned about that type of issue, not only on Swamp Creek, but on other sensitive areas. We've been stated our concern that and whether or not the critical areas ordinances are followed and are good enough to address Commissioner Benaziski's concerns about Swamp Creek. Commissioner Matthews.
Okay, because the universe did not grant me the sugar coating skills, I'm just going to be super blunt.
You don't need to sugarcoat it.
We as a city keep saying that our environment is important to us, and the city council keeps talking about it. We keep talking about it. But I have yet to really see the city government and management enforce or really do things to protect our critical areas. And I could be wrong, but as a commissioner, it's very disheartening when I see two things that we're supposed to, the city says that they're going to protect, and they want to protect our critical areas and our environment and our tree canopy, but yet still keep doing things to harm it. And we have excuses and rationalizations, and we need housing, we need this. Yes, we do, but there has to be a better way. And I just wish that we as a commission and a city council and city management could put our money where our mouth is when it comes to that.
I can offer just a quick response to that is when the comprehensive plan, natural environment and shoreline element were updated and the accompanying development regulations, those were done to meet best available science. The shoreline rules, and Swamp Creek is a shoreline of the state, were approved by the Department of Ecology. So the policies, the rules are in effect based on best available science to protect those critical areas, whether it's wetlands, shorelines, steep slopes. And we update those every 6 years. And the shoreline regulations, again, as I said, have to be approved by the Department of Ecology. So we have the policies and the rules in place, and best available science is just that. Science kind of evolves. If you look at how these areas were protected 20, 30 years ago, looks a lot different. So that as the science changes, the policies and rules are updated to reflect that science. The other issue that you've probably raised is, does the city hold developers accountable to those rules? And the answer is yes, that's our job. Do bad things happen sometimes? Yes, that's why we have code enforcement. So again, I would disagree with the perspective that the city is doing nothing to protect critical areas. I would also say that in terms of tree regulations, the city has, over the past several months, adopted several new tree regulations, and in fact is bringing back another suite of those regulations in the next few weeks to the city council. So, and I would also say that the city has just recently adopted a climate action plan. So there will definitely be more to come on implementing that plan to protect the larger environment and meet, greenhouse gas reductions.
I'm going to give you a softball here. So I am very familiar with variances as they have to do with critical areas, and they're not supposed to come very easy at all. So would you like to just address how the city looks at those variances within the critical areas? Because sometimes that is the action that happens that really sets off people that are concerned, as we are, about the environment.
Well, you are correct that variances are infrequent, because if you are that's by nature of how they are. There are lots of conditions that have to be met for a variance to be approved, so it's not automatic. So again, the idea is that you comply with the regulations. If you need a variance to deviate from those critical area regulations, there has to be a good reason for it, and you have to meet the conditions that apply to a variance, and they don't happen very frequently. If you're going to follow up with how many, I don't have that number. at the
No,
top of
no,
my
I'm not
head.
gonna. But, and those types of things are also in the Department of College. They have rules about that too. That you have to.
For shoreline rules, for sure. So for variances for say, for example, wetlands or streams, that is usually the purview of the local jurisdiction. If you want to vary from the shoreline regulations, the Department of Ecology has the final say on that.
And so I was just going to say that, the shoreline rules. And so that the shoreline rules apply to Swamp Creek, the Sammamish River, and the shores of Lake Washington. So there's a special overlay of rules for development
On
within-
Swamp Creek.
on Swamp Creek, correct?
Oh, that's good news. Go ahead, Commissioner Benaziski.
Yeah, I very much appreciate the best available science position. I'm so grateful for it. I understand that Washington State has some of the finest, best critical areas regulations based on science. And again, I'm so grateful for that. I do think best available science is lagging a little bit behind what nature is showing us. I think we're still operating under a no net loss of ecological function in our development. I don't think the legislature has yet moved toward net gain, which is something that a lot of people in the ecological world are talking about and what we now need to move toward. We have destroyed so much that it's actually being harmful to us now, and we need to think about giving back so that we can continue to sustain ourselves and thrive as a species. And I understand, because of the lane that we occupy, the Planning Commission in a small, very lovely suburban urban city in a much larger context. There's probably not so much mold breaking that we can really do, but I would just love to be on the forefront of thinking about a different way to live together. Like maybe the density should be moved further west and then not there. And then I shudder to say this because I know this is recorded and people are going to get very angry, but maybe there are some residential areas that should be a little bit more dense, like maybe mine, for example, where there aren't so many critical areas, instead of trying to push everything into this corridor along 522, where yes, I think that there should be density there because we have infrastructure built there, we have transit, there's a lot of concrete already. Much better to develop on concrete that's already there than to develop on land that's not been degraded that way. But still, I keep coming back to the fact that Swamp Creek runs right through there, and it too needs to be protected through that area just like it does upstream. So I guess what I'm really wanting, and this is just coming from the heart, it's not, again, I'm not asking for any change, but I would just really love for us to think together about kind of a third way and not just continuing to, zone by map, because that's how we've always done it. And yeah, I don't know, this is just me being really tired and being really kind of scared and afraid for our future as a species. I don't know, I will stop. Thank you for listening.
Well, Commissioner, if you would like to draft a commentary, I don't know what to call it, about those concerns, which I think many of us do share. I'm not putting any words in anyone's mouth, but I think that's reasonable. I think we all have discussed the give and take on this issue of density and the rest of the city. And the TOD, we've talked about 85 feet versus 65 feet. These are reasonable. What you bring up is a reasonable policy question, which is can't be addressed right here, but yet if you feel that we can send a little note along to the council that we can agree on, open to at least a lot of considering it for the commission. It may not make everybody may not be able to agree, but if you want to give it a shot, you've got some time to work on it. Oh, yeah, they can. They can do minority reports, but you're right. But it might be helpful if it's in a way that most of us can agree to the concern. That's what I'm suggesting. It has more emphasis at the council level. And they're already familiar with some of our previous concerns. And I know that they got an earful on the missing middle public hearing. Debbie, Ms. Ben.
No, Debbie's fine. I think Commissioner Banasinski, I think I'd like some clarification here. Is the comment that you're making directly related to the TOD? In other words, are you saying there is an alternative way that you would prefer the regulations to be adjacent to Swamp Creek? Or are you talking about a broader policy suggestion that we need to look at thinking about things differently, like you suggested, net gain rather than no net loss? So I just want some clarification to know where you're coming from on this.
That's a fair question. Thank you, Debbie. I think both. I really, because frankly, if we just continue on the path that we have, we get more dense development there. Whatever we build there is going to be there for decades. And now is the time that our planet is telling us we need to rethink things. So, and I think that's why I'm bringing it up, although I'm not, I realize that I don't know how to do this. I'm not asking for a change to this map, but I wish there was a change to the map. I'm not going to push it because I don't know that there would be will among the Planning Commission. And I know it's a big lift, but also at the same time, it feels to me that the fact that we don't ask for things like this, well, I guess we kind of do, and our community tells us how they feel about it sometimes. Anyway, I guess I'm saying both, Debbie, just to put it shortly. I'm not going to push on it. I don't want to get in the way of this hearing happens when it needs to happen and it going on to the commission. Yeah, and I think broadly, I'd like to think about policy changes for zoning in the future.
Commissioner Lucis.
Lori, I know we work with a lot of maps, a lot of zoning maps, a lot of other maps within the city. Is there a master map somewhere that overlays everything that would show potentially where the critical areas and shorelines protections start? Or is there some way to look at these and put it into perspective to show that, yes, we do have policies that supersedes these zoning regulations in this area along Swamp Creek or something like that?
Yeah, there are a couple of maps. One is the shoreline map that shows what's called the shoreline jurisdiction, and that's where the shoreline rules apply. And then there are also critical area maps. The thing about the critical area maps is that we don't apply the regulations based on those maps because they can be very inaccurate. The sources of them are very old or not accurate. So the critical area rules are dependent on a study done on a property specific basis. And then when we have that information, we store it, and then we update our maps as we can. So there are some parts of the critical area maps that are very, very accurate, and others that are just a flag to us, like, hey, pay attention, because historically, we think there's a wetland here, for example. Those maps are on the city's website. And that you can, in what's called parcel viewer, you can see the critical areas overlay, like the
Okay.
parcels. So you can do the layers of the critical areas. I think the shoreline jurisdiction is also in that set of maps that you can overlay.
Thank you. I mean, I've seen them all separately, especially when we worked on the critical areas and shorelines master plan
Yeah.
some number of years ago. And actually that came to mind even before Tracy brought up this whole concept, how I was thinking back to when we had those conversations and every other line was best available science says this and best available science says
Right.
that. And Department of Ecology says this and recommends this and has approved this, blah, 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 blah. I remember going through that process. Of course, I came on board partway through it, so I wasn't there for all of it. But yes, I remember the individual maps. I was just curious to know if there's a place that put it into perspective and overlaid them. But thank you for that,
Right.
that clarification.
I think the best thing for me to do is probably pursue this independently as a resident or to write something for the commission. So, but thank you for indulging me in the conversation.
It's your right. You know, it might be a good idea for the commission, and considering Commissioner Banczewski's issue that's brought up is just to identify the shoreline items that are in this TOD just for the commission's benefit. Like the Swamp Creek, is that area right through there, is that actually under the jurisdiction of shoreline, you know, things like that, just for our information. I think that would be a good piece for us to know.
Yeah, I'm happy to add a link to the rules and to the map. There's also a whole chapter in the comprehensive plan about shorelines.
So let me be clear, the map that is on the website is as latest one that there is.
It is the correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I just want to make sure. Sometimes things change and,
Yeah,
you know,
it's not
don't get
updated. Yeah, I
updated.
think those are correct.
So is there any further discussion? Okay, so we have a public hearing, and that is the only thing on our agenda, except I do believe we're going to take public comments, but not on the item that's being heard.
Right. Typically, you, when you open your public comment period, you would say, if you want to speak about the TOD rules, please save your comments for the public hearing
Right.
portion.
But other than that, and are we going to have minutes to approve next meeting, or are we going to save them for the meeting after that?
They'll be ready.
Okay, so we'll do those quickly.
And then in December, your first meeting, November.
November?
I'm skipping a whole month. Oh my
What
gosh.
happened to Thanksgiving?
Yeah, right. So in early November, you'll turn your attention, that first November meeting will be presumably, depending on what you hear, your final recommendations on the TOD package. And then the second part of that agenda will be back to the transportation element, where they're going to talk about actual projects and bring back changes that you requested from the last meeting where you discussed transportation.
And then the meeting after that is we're gonna,
The next meeting after that, there'll be I'm not sure whether you would have that meeting or not, the joint meeting with the city council to present your recommendations on the TOD would also be in November.
okay, so will that be in lieu of our regular meeting?
Yeah, that hasn't, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we would be interested in.
You would be
having a
interested in
discussion.
knowing that, huh?
Well, because, we have a docket of things
Right.
to do, and if we need to meet, we
Yeah.
need to meet.
So
So.
the next thing on your agenda, besides the continuing transportation element, at the end of this year into early next, there are 3 elements that are not, they're not heavily policy dependent. They're more background information dependent. That's the public services element, the utilities element, where we gain information from actually lots of outside agencies to put that all together. And then the economic development element, and that particular element, the intention is to reflect the city's most recent economic development plan. It's a really small element, but those are the 3 that are targeted next, not for a long period of time. We're inserting them between transportation and then next spring, climate action, and again, surface water downtown. There's some big things coming your way.
Well, if you look at the economic development and you see what we're doing with this GOD, I think there's some connection there. So that's worth a bit of discussion. I'm sure the city council will also see it that way, I would think. But who knows, they just do that. It's okay, they see things in their own light. That's why they're elected and we're not. Any further discussion? Okay, it's 8:32 and the meeting is adjourned. Oh, you did? Good.
Oh.
Well, it's the recording stuff.